Welcome, everyone. In this masterclass, I want to talk about one of the most important transitions in a security career, stepping into a leadership role and making sure your first 90 days build trust instead of confusion. This session is for new security managers, directors, and IT leaders who have inherited security responsibility, whether that was part of the plan or not. What I want to give you today is not theory, and it is not a generic leadership talk. It is a practical framework you can use right away. We are going to walk through what strong security leaders do in the first 30 days, the next 30 days, and the final 30 days of that critical opening stretch. We will talk about business context, risk, people, prioritization, communication, and the roadmap that follows. The goal is simple. By the end of this masterclass, you should be able to walk into a new leadership role with a clearer plan, better judgment, and a stronger sense of where to focus first. If you get the first 90 days right, you create credibility that helps every decision after that. If you get them wrong, you spend months recovering from avoidable mistakes. So let's start with why this window matters so much. The first 90 days matter because people are not only evaluating your technical knowledge, they are evaluating your judgment. They are deciding whether you understand the business, whether you can lead with composure, and whether you are someone they can trust when trade-offs get hard. That starts immediately. Your team sees how you listen. Your peers see how you collaborate. Executives see how you frame risk and whether you understand what actually matters to the organization. This is why the first 90 days can either build trust and momentum or create confusion and drag. If you move too fast before you understand the environment, people experience you as reactive. If you start changing tools, priorities, or structures without context, your team feels anxious and your peers feel imposed on. On the other hand, if you listen well, ask sharp questions, and make a few smart moves early, people begin to believe that you know what you are doing even before the larger results show up. One of the biggest leadership lessons here is that the first 90 days are not the time for heroics. They are the time for disciplined judgment. You do not earn credibility by appearing busy. You earn credibility by making people feel that there is a thoughtful leader in the room. That is why I say the first 90 days shape your reputation more than your first 90 emails. Judgment beats heroics. So if that is the stakes, the next question is obvious. What does success actually look like in this opening window? Success in the first 90 days is often misunderstood. A lot of new leaders think success means immediately rebuilding the entire stack, replacing tools, or fixing every inherited issue at once. That usually comes from a good place. They want to show value quickly, but in practice, that approach often creates noise, drains credibility, and makes the organization less confident in the leader, not more. Real success looks very different. It means understanding the business and its risk appetite. It means mapping stakeholders and building early allies. It means identifying the risks that are truly material to the organization, not just the ones that look technically ugly on paper. It means stabilizing obvious gaps without creating unnecessary disruption, and it means producing a roadmap that people can actually support. Strong first 90 days are defined by clarity, alignment, and momentum. If you leave this phase with a better understanding of the business, stronger relationships, a prioritized risk picture, and a credible next step plan, you are winning. That may feel less dramatic than a massive transformation effort, but it is far more effective. And the place where all of that starts is not with the tools. It starts with the business itself. In the first 30 days, your job is to learn how the organization creates value and what it cannot afford to lose. Start with revenue and mission priorities. How does the business make money? What are the services, products, operations, or capabilities that matter most? If they stop, what happens? Security leaders who understand this early make better decisions because they do not treat every issue as equal. From there, move into critical operational processes. What absolutely cannot go down? What dependencies sit underneath those processes? Often, the biggest security conversations are not about a single tool or control. They are about the systems, workflows, and teams that keep the business running. If you do not understand those dependencies, you can create disruption while thinking you are reducing risk. Then, identify crown jewel systems and data. What would hurt the organization most if it were exposed, manipulated, or made unavailable? Finally, understand customer and regulatory obligations. Know the commitments the business has already made before you start changing direction. Security leaders earn credibility by learning what the business cannot afford to lose before they touch a single tool or policy. Once you understand the business context, the next step is to assess the actual security function and environment you inherited. Now that you have business context, it is time to build situational awareness. I want to be clear here. This is not a giant audit. You are not trying to inspect every control at a deep technical level in the first month. What you are doing is quickly identifying where the real gaps, blind spots, and friction points are so you can lead from reality instead of assumption. Start with the team structure and current priorities. Who owns what today? What initiatives are already in motion? What is overloaded, stalled, or unclear? Then look at incident history. What kinds of events have happened in the last 12 months? What patterns show up? Where did the organization respond well, and where did it struggle? That tells you a lot about both posture and culture. From there, assess the real environment: identity and access, logging and visibility, vulnerability management, cloud exposure, incident response readiness, and backup and recovery. You do not need a perfect maturity model yet. You need enough clarity to spot material risk and operational friction. The goal in the first month is fast situational awareness, not a giant audit. Know where the real gaps are before you commit to program changes. Once you understand the environment, the next thing to map is the human environment, because leadership decisions succeed or fail through people. Leadership in security is never just about controls and tools. It is also about power, alignment, and friction. In your first 30 days, you need to understand the human map of the organization. Executives care about business risk, regulatory exposure, resilience, and budget efficiency. The security team cares about direction, support, recognition, and whether leadership will create clarity or more churn. IT and infrastructure teams care about stability, speed, and operational continuity. Legal, HR, and finance care about liability, compliance, cost, and timing. If you do not understand what each group cares about, your recommendations will land poorly even when they are technically correct. That is why this step matters so much. Ask yourself, where does friction already exist? Where does security get seen as a blocker? Who are the natural partners? Who has influence that does not show up on an org chart? Who needs early visibility so they are not surprised later? One of the most practical leadership truths here is that your first allies matter more than your first tool selection. Early relationships determine how easy or hard it will be to move the program later. Map the power dynamics before you make any big moves, and you will lead with a lot more precision. A good way to do that mapping well is to ask better questions. And that brings us to the questions every new security leader should ask. The quality of your first 90 days depends heavily on the quality of your questions. If you ask shallow questions, you get shallow answers. If you ask sharp questions, people start giving you real signal. With executives, ask what business outcomes matter most this year, where they believe the organization carries the most risk, and what a security win would actually look like to them. Those questions tell you what leadership is paying attention to and where you need to build alignment early. With your team, ask what they are proud of, what frustrates them, where the real coverage gaps are, and what decisions they are waiting on leadership to make. That helps you see capability, morale, and bottlenecks. With peers in IT and infrastructure, ask where security creates friction, what changes would make collaboration easier, and where shared risk is sitting right now. Those questions surface relationship problems and operational realities that dashboards do not show. And then ask yourself the hard questions. What am I reacting to without enough data? Whose opinion am I underweighting? Where am I defaulting to comfort instead of clarity? Good leaders do not just interrogate the environment, they interrogate their own assumptions. That habit keeps you from moving too fast in the wrong direction. Once you have gathered that context, the next phase is no longer observation alone. It is time to prioritize and stabilize. After the first month, you should have enough context to stop collecting input endlessly and start making decisions. Days 31 through 60 are about narrowing focus. This is where many leaders either gain momentum or lose it. If you try to treat every issue as equally urgent, the team gets spread thin, peers get frustrated, and executives stop believing that you can separate signal from noise. Use a consistent lens. Look at business impact first, then likelihood, then visibility and detection gaps, then customer or regulatory pressure, then effort and dependency complexity. When you evaluate issues that way, patterns start to emerge. Some items clearly require immediate action because the impact is high, the likelihood is real, or visibility is dangerously weak. Other items belong in near-term stabilization because they create downstream risk or customer pressure. And some things, while important, belong in longer-term transformation because they are too dependent or too complex to force prematurely. Strong leaders create momentum by narrowing focus and stabilizing the basics before they launch broad transformation efforts. That discipline is what turns awareness into traction, and one of the smartest ways to create traction in that period is to balance quick wins with foundational work. Quick wins matter because they create visible momentum. They show the organization that leadership is active, that decisions are being made, and that problems are being closed. Cleaning up privileged access, fixing obvious ownership issues, closing critical logging gaps, or refreshing incident contacts can all be valuable early moves. These wins build confidence, and confidence gives you room to lead. But quick wins are not enough. If all you do is chase visible wins, you create the appearance of progress without actually lowering the most important risks. That is where foundational work comes in. Asset inventory, backup and recovery testing, governance, ownership models, and repeatable risk measurement are not always glamorous, but they are what make the program durable. The leadership move here is balance. Use quick wins to earn trust, but do not confuse visibility with risk reduction. Optics without foundations is a losing strategy. When you combine visible progress with deeper structural improvement, you build a program that looks credible and becomes credible at the same time. Once you have that balance, you are ready to turn it into a roadmap that others can understand and support. By the time you reach days 61 through 90, people should not just know what you think, they should know where you are taking the program next. That is what the roadmap is for. A good roadmap is credible, sequenced, tied to business value, and honest about dependencies. It is not a giant wish list that collapses under its own weight. Start by documenting the first 90 days clearly. What quick wins were delivered? What risks were stabilized? What situational awareness did you gain? Then move into months 4 through 6. What are the top 3 to 5 priorities that genuinely matter most? What dependencies exist across IT, business units, or budget? What resources are required? Then extend into months 7 through 12, where you begin to show how foundational improvements and longer-term transformation will take shape. Experienced leaders create plans that are supportable. They do not pretend there are no constraints. They show sequencing, ownership, trade-offs, and value. When leadership sees that kind of roadmap, they are much more likely to trust it, fund it, and defend it. Of course, even the best roadmap fails if it is communicated poorly. That brings us to one of the highest leverage parts of the first 90 days. Communication is not a soft skill on the side of leadership. It is one of the core disciplines that determines whether your priorities gain support or meet resistance. Your team needs weekly clarity on what matters, what is changing, and how you will support them. Peers in IT and other functions need transparency, shared ownership language, and a collaborative tone that lowers friction instead of inflaming it. Executives need concise updates that connect risk, progress, and what you need from them. One mistake leaders make is using the same communication style for every audience. That does not work. The security team may want detail and direction. Executives usually want 3 points, not 30. They want to know what matters, what progress is being made, and whether anything needs their decision or support. Legal, HR, and finance often need to be engaged early when issues arise, especially if compliance, liability, or cost could be affected. The leaders who communicate well earn more trust, more budget support, and more room to execute. They do not leave people guessing, and they do not surprise stakeholders late. Communication is part of the work, not commentary about the work. And that matters even more when you look at the mistakes that damage credibility early. There are a handful of mistakes that consistently damage leaders in the first 90 days. The first is doing too much too fast. That overloads the team, creates churn, and signals weak prioritization. The second is a tool-first mindset. Buying solutions before you understand the real problems creates waste and often resentment. The third is failing to learn the business. If your recommendations do not connect to business reality, they get dismissed no matter how technically sound they are. Another major mistake is leading with fear. Fear without solutions is not leadership, it is noise. Executives disengage when everything is presented like an emergency with no clear path forward. Ignoring team dynamics is another one. If you lose the trust of the people doing the work, your strategy will stall. And if you fail to build peer relationships, security becomes isolated, which makes everything harder to move. Finally, many leaders overwhelm executives with detail. When you flood them with too much information, you do not look thorough. You look unable to prioritize. Credibility often erodes quietly, and so does support. Good leadership means knowing what to emphasize, what to simplify, and what to hold back until it is needed. So if we pull all of this together, the entire first 90 days can be summarized in one signature framework. This is the backbone of the entire masterclass. In the first 30 days, you observe. You learn the business, map stakeholders, and build situational awareness across people, process, and technology. The leadership outcome in that phase is contextual credibility. People begin to trust that you understand the environment you are now leading. In days 31 through 60, you prioritize. You apply a consistent lens to the risks and issues you identified. You choose what needs immediate action, what needs stabilization, and what belongs in longer-term transformation. You deliver a few smart, quick wins, but you stay grounded in what actually reduces risk. The leadership outcome in that phase is earned momentum. In days 61 through 90, you execute. That does not mean you finish everything. It means you build the roadmap, communicate progress clearly, and position the program for long-term influence, support, and budget. The leadership outcome there is sustained trust. Observe, prioritize, and execute. If you remember nothing else from this session, remember that sequence and do not skip a phase. Now let's turn that framework into immediate action you can take this week. If you want to apply this masterclass immediately, here are 5 actions to take this week. First, map your top stakeholders. List the executives, peers, and team members who matter most, and note what each one cares about. Second, review the last 12 months of incidents and audit findings. Look for themes and patterns, not just isolated events. Third, identify your top 3 business-critical risks, not technical risks in isolation, but risks that would genuinely hurt the organization. Fourth, choose one quick win and one foundational priority. Pick something visible that can build momentum and something structural that is worth defending to leadership. Fifth, draft a simple 30, 60, 90-day plan. It does not need to be perfect. One page is enough if it is clear. The point is not to create a giant document. The point is to force clarity. Leaders who do these 5 things will usually be ahead of the leaders who keep gathering information without turning it into action. To make that even easier, I also recommend giving people practical assets they can use right away. One of the best ways to turn a masterclass into something actionable is to give people tools they can use immediately. That is why these companion assets matter. A 30, 60, 90-day planning worksheet helps people translate the framework into their actual role. A stakeholder map template helps them think more clearly about alignment, influence, and friction. A first 90 days checklist gives them a practical sequence to work through. And a one-page executive update template helps them communicate clearly with leadership. These kinds of assets are valuable because they reduce the gap between understanding and action. A lot of people leave a strong session motivated, but motivation fades quickly if there is no practical next step. A good resource package keeps the momentum going and helps the audience implement what they heard. These tools are available to the Cyber Warriors HQ community, and they are field-tested resources, not generic downloads. People do not need more clutter. They need resources that make them better operators and better leaders. And that brings us to the closing message of the masterclass. Let me close with this. Great leaders do not start by proving how much they know. They start by building understanding, trust, and direction. In a new security leadership role, that matters more than almost anything else. The people who succeed in their first 90 days are usually not the ones who move the fastest or talk the loudest. They are the ones who listen first, prioritize clearly, communicate well, and create confidence in the people around them. If you can do that, you change the conversation. Security stops being seen only as a list of problems and starts being seen as a function that can lead with maturity. That is what earns support. That is what earns influence. And that is what gives you the ability to build something stronger over time. So take the framework, apply it to your role, and keep leading with clarity, not chaos. That is the difference between reacting to a role and truly stepping into it as a leader.